All right, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. Just a brief disclaimer, I don't mean to set myself up as an authority or a guru on the big book. I am a fellow traveler, a fellow student on a very broad highway of interpretation. I say that so that if you hear something you can't reconcile with what you find on your own, all I ask is you give it a second thought. If you still can't jive what you hear with what you see, write it down and bring it up at the end of the meeting. We intentionally left some time and we try to respect that at the end of the meeting for questions and discussions and so on. So if you've got a different take, let's hear it. That's how we learn from one another. If you find this stuff dubious, let's hear about it. Let's talk about it. Okay. We have been talking about the problem up until this point. We've gone through the doctor's opinion where we learned about the threefold malady. And it's not twofold, it's threefold. We have a physical allergy, a mental obsession, and a spiritual malady. We are restless, irritable, discontented during periods of forced abstinence. Uh, I was like a raw nerve. Everything hurt. I was hypersensitive, overly critical. I was not a pretty person to be around. And I eventually convinced myself that despite my experience of what happens every time I pick up, I can convince myself of a lie that this time it'll be different, that this time I'll stop at a certain point, or this time I'll do whatever it is you fill in the blank. And I give in to that obsession. And the obsession then forces me to take the drink, triggers the physical allergy, and I'm off to the races.
Hi, Eileen.
Um, and then we got a good example of an alcoholic, Bill Wilson. We saw how he drinks and how he thinks and how he acts, and hopefully we start to identify with him. And we've started to learn about the solution, and there is a solution, and that is a solution, singular. But I think, by the time Bill finished that chapter, he's probably thinking, there's bound to be some folks who are not going to go along with this idea. Some folks are still going to have trouble with this God concept. Some folks are still going to think they could use self-will. They can try other methods to avoid that queer mental twist that gives it that mental, that obsession. And so he wrote a chapter called More About Alcoholism that is about that and nothing less. It's about the insanity of the first drink. Step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now, if you're like me, I was really offended at that because I knew I did a lot of crazy, stupid things when I was drinking and drugging, but I'm not doing that anymore. So if I'm not drinking and drugging and I'm not crazy like that, why do I need to be restored to sanity? I'm as sane as everybody else. Well, one of the things I learned how to do in this big book workshop process is learn to use the dictionary. And when I looked up the word sanity rather, I found it was defined as the ability to recognize the truth in all matters. So if sanity is recognizing the truth, then insanity is believing in a lie. And when I heard that, I realized I was insane because every time I picked up that first drink of that first drug and I was stone cold sober when I did it, the dumbest thing, the worst decision I ever made, I made sober. And it was to pick up that first drink. So when I look at it that way, I recognize, yes, I was insane. The crazy, stupid things I did when I was drinking and drugging, that's not insanity, that's intoxication. Alcohol and drugs lower your inhibitions. And if you get a head full of chemicals that lower your inhibitions, watch out. You are going to do some things you wouldn't ordinarily do, but it doesn't make you crazy. It makes you inebriated. It makes you wasted. It makes you high. Whatever word you want to put on it, it's intoxication. It's not insanity. And so if I need to be restored to sanity, then I need to know, well, what is the lie? What is the lie that I keep telling myself? So Bill wrote this chapter more about alcoholism, and in an effort to show us the various ways that we deceive ourselves, he tells us some stories. He talks about the man of 30. He talks about our friend Jim. Then he goes to the jaywalker and our friend Fred. And in each of those stories,
I like Fred.
I like Fred. I like Jim, the car salesman, but that's because I'm a car salesman. But in each instance, what we're going to try and do is identify the point at which that person crossed over the line from sanity to insanity, and what was the lie they told themselves. Now, we've already gone through the man of 30. The man of 30 realized that once he started drinking, he had no power whatsoever over alcohol. So he recognized he had an alcohol problem. So he decided he was going to stop drinking until he made his $1 million, until he could retire. And he was a remarkable man. That's the word Bill used, because he stayed dry, not sober, dry for 25 years. And when he retired, out came the bed slipper, the carpet slippers and the bottle, and he drank himself to death within 4 to 5 years. The lie he told himself was that after an extended period of abstinence, he could safely drink again. Many of us here have done that. I've done it a few times. This disease is progressive, and whether we're drinking or not, it progresses. When we're not drinking, it's like it's running alongside us the whole time we're sober. And anytime we choose to get out of our lane and into that lane, our body will react as if it had been using every one of the days, in my case, for 10 years that I hadn't been using. I got caught out so fast, it made my head spin. And that's what happened to the man of 30. He started after 25 years of sobriety, and his body acted as if he'd been drinking every one of those days, and he wasn't 30 anymore. He was 55. And when you get older, your body doesn't handle these chemicals the way it did when you were younger. So the man of 30 started drinking when he was 55 or 50 and drank himself to death within 5 years. And then we were introduced to our friend Jim. Let's talk about Jim a little bit. Jim is an example of, I don't really like the terms high bottom, low bottom, but Jim is an example of what people refer to as a low bottom drunk. We're going to get an example of a high bottom drunk in one of the stories coming up. Our friend Fred, he's more of a high bottom drunk. But our friend Jim, on page 35, I'm going to draw your attention to the bottom of page 35, where he's already learned about his relationship to alcohol. And at the bottom of page 35, it says, after half a dozen relapses in rapid succession, this guy relapsed 6 times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, they worked with him. These were good AA guys. They didn't say, well, he really doesn't want it. When he wants it enough, he'll come back. No, they worked with him each time. But here's the important point. And I don't want to get sidetracked with that other stuff. He agreed he was a real alcoholic, and he knew. Here's what he knew. He knew 2 things. He knew if he drank again, the 2 things he knew were, 1, he's going to wind up back in the booby hatch, face another trip to the asylum, to the rehab. Fact number 1. That's what's going to happen if you pick up. Here's number 2. He knew he would lose his family. So he knew the consequences of relapse, and he already relapsed 6 times up until this point. if you look at the top of the next page, it says, yet he got drunk again. He got drunk again. And when these AAers asked him what happened, just like any good alcoholic, instead of telling him what happened, they get a story. We love telling stories. They say, what happened? He said, let me tell you a story. You got to set the scene. You got to describe the weather and so on. He has to tell the story. We're great storytellers. So he starts to tell his story of what happened. And he came into work on Tuesday, missed Monday. We alcoholics, we don't do Mondays and Fridays very well. We always like to start the party early, and we never seem to finish by Monday morning. So we don't do Mondays and Fridays very well. So he didn't show up on Monday. And when he didn't show up, his boss, who he probably hired because he at one time owned that car dealership where he was working at, asked, gee, Jim, what's up? Where were you yesterday? No phone calls, no texts, no email, no carrier pigeon, nothing to tell us where you were. So he had a few words with his boss, nothing major, just irritating. And then he starts to do a few things which seem normal. He's a car salesman. Car salesmen in those days went out. They called on customers. Today, it's more of a showroom environment. You go to the showroom, but in those days, it was like an insurance salesman. You get in the car and you go out to the prospect. So that made sense. He got in the car and off he went. You know, maybe he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because again, he's working for a dealership he used to own. And the guy who he hired is busting his stones about where he was the day before. So off he goes, probably a little irritated, okay? But it's not unusual for a car salesman to get in a car and go off and try and sell a car. And while he's driving, he gets hungry. What does he do? He does the normal thing. He pulls into a roadside place where he'd been before to have a sandwich with some milk. Which incidentally is also normal. If you're a car salesman, it's normal to go out and sell a car. And if you're hungry, it's normal to stop and have a sandwich. So far, so good. But then the trouble starts. On page 36, right in the middle, suddenly, oh God, that's when the trouble started. Suddenly. Now, he tells us in the previous paragraph that he had no intention of drinking. Twice he tells us he had no intention of drinking. He says, I had no intention. And later on, he said, still no thought of drinking. So a thought occurs to him. Here's the thought. It couldn't hurt me to have some alcohol in my milk after 7 relapses. Now, is that what he said? No, that was the truth. It would have been the truth if he told himself that, but he didn't. It couldn't hurt me on an empty stomach, on a full stomach. That's the lie he tells himself. So he makes a decision based on a lie. He takes the drink. He has a sandwich, orders the milk, puts the whiskey in the milk, takes a drink, and he's off to the races. This guy, on page 31, incidentally, we already took a look at all the lies we tell ourselves before we pick up that first drink. And it tells us at the end of that list, if you look at page 31, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around. I hope I don't lose anybody, but on page 31, there's a paragraph in the middle that begins with, here are some of the methods we tried. But at the end of that paragraph, he says, we could increase the list ad infinitum, which means forever. So our friend Jim has just increased the list. Here's an example that after a number of relapses, I could safely, on a full stomach, take that drink. We can all add to that list. So where we are today is we're on page 37. We have, until I want to go over one other thing, I'm sorry. We talked about when the trouble starts. The trouble starts with suddenly the thought occurs. And suddenly, incidentally, is the sound that the obsession makes when it strikes. If you want to know what an obsession sounds like, that's what it sounds like. Suddenly.
It's never that loud, though.
It's never that loud. Maybe if it was, it would drown out the thoughts, but it's not. Bill, in telling us his story on this page, Bill is telling us how totally selfish we are and how defenseless we are against the first drink. And he does that by exaggerating the use of the pronoun I. On page 36, the pronoun I is used 26 times. And the exaggeration is just being used to point out how selfish we are. Our selfish pride. I, the great I. So now we're going to be on page 37. I'm sorry. Got a little sidetracked there. I know we're probably, I want to read what the paragraph that we ended with last week was the first full paragraph. He says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, and incidentally, this paragraph is highlighted in its entirety. We have a color coding system for our highlighting. I'm sure someone will put that in the chat. For general highlights, we use yellow. For prayers and promises, we use pink. For musts, we use green. For recovered references, we use orange. And for approach references, we use blue. So this is highlighted in yellow or whatever color you want. You're not bound. This is just my nonsense. Whatever the precise definition may be, we call this plain insanity. And please underline that, plain insanity. How can such a, underline this, lack of proportion of the ability to think straight, please underline of the ability to think straight. That's to see the truth. If I'm seeing straight, I'm seeing the truth. If I'm not seeing the truth, I'm not thinking straight. I'm not thinking right. I'm thinking with less than a whole mind. And one of the definitions of sanity, besides belief, recognizing the truth, is functioning on a complete mind, on a whole mind. So he says, on the ability to think straight, be called anything else. Here's a great definition of insanity: the lack of proportion and the lack of ability to think straight. You may think this an extreme case. Again, we're referring to our friend Jim. To us, it's not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes, you may want to underline that, we have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. We've already read that at certain times, we're able to recall with sufficient force the pain and the suffering, and we don't take that drink. But at certain times, we are unable to recall with sufficient force the pain and the suffering of even so much as a few days or a week or a month ago. And that's what he's talking about, what we're talking about here. We sometimes reflected, we sometimes thought more than Jim did upon the consequences, right? Just, I know what's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. I don't do it. I don't do it. But eventually, that thought of the ease and comfort, the sense of ease and comfort, overpowers all the other thoughts. More than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the, please highlight, curious mental phenomenon. That is the obsession of the mind, the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, what's underlying sound reasoning, that's my conscience. That along with my conscience, there invariably ran some insanely trivial excuse. Let's highlight insanely trivial excuse, and that's the lie. That our sane reasoning holds us to some extent. In our friend Jim, he mentions that when the thought occurred to him, he says, I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. So he vaguely sensed, right? If the thoughts occur, they are hazy. On page 24, Bill tells us, if these thoughts of the certain consequences occur to us, two things. One, they're hazy. And Jim says, I vaguely sensed, so it's hazy. But what else? We're told that they are readily supplanted, meaning replaced by another thought. And that's where he says in the next line, I felt reassured. So he vaguely sensed there's the haziness of the consequences, but it's supplanted by another feeling. He felt reassured of the lie, that I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. So his conscience was telling him one thing. He wasn't listening to it. Back to page 37. I hope that didn't jump around too much for anyone. But there was always a curious mental phenomenon that along with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Please highlight the rest of this paragraph. The next three lines are sound reasoning. And please underline sound reasoning and write conscience. Our conscience failed to hold us in check. We are defenseless against the first drink. The insane idea won out. Please underline insane and above it, let's write lie. Let's call it what it is. It's a lie. The lie won out. Next day, we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. How the hell did that happen again? Incomprehensible demoralization. Can anyone here identify with that? Anyone here ever say that? How the hell did that happen? I made a decision not to do it. I remember that decision. I don't remember where I went off, but all of a sudden, it's a day later, I'm in another state with one shoe. How the hell did that happen? Insane, incomprehensible demoralization. Next paragraph. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified. Please highlight justified, because that is insane thinking. That's rationalization and justification. We tell ourselves, I am justified in doing this. Why? By nervousness. Let's underline nervousness. Anger. Let's underline that. Worry. Underline that. Depression. Jealousy. Let's underline both of those, or the like. Those are the mental blank spots that we are justified. I'm going to take that drink, not because I think on a full stomach, pouring it in with milk will be okay. I'm taking it because I'm justified that I am nervous as hell and I need something to take off that edge.
It could also be like an elated feeling. It could be positive feelings.
Right. You're
It's
feeling
not
real
like a
good.
lie.
You want to feel better. But we have some justification. Maybe we're pissed off about something.
We never get pissed off.
No, alcoholics don't get pissed off. We get even. Worry,
We punish.
we punish. Depression, jealousy. I have a legitimate reason for taking this drink. Jealousy. Did you see what she did? Did you see what they did? Jealousy. So sometimes we go out deliberately without telling ourselves we're doing it based on a lie. We are justified. I'm pissed off. I'm nervous as hell. I need to relax. My blood pressure's my head's gonna pop off of my body. I need to settle down. Justification.
Is it also justification by, it's either I'm gonna this question, I should have waited for the end. I'll wait at the end.
Okay. Um, in any case, nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, those are other words to describe being restless, irritable, and discontented. Those are other words to describe guilt, shame, and remorse. Those are other words to describe a spiritual malady. We have a spiritual malady. We are prey to anger, depression. Does that sound familiar? Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but it's going to be coming up in the bedevilments in a little while. These mental blank spots we tell ourselves. The spiritual malady. We're describing our spiritual malady. And then he says, but even in this type of beginning, we're obliged to admit that our justification, and please underline justification and above it write lie. Let's keep track of what the words we're using, what do they mean? When he says justification, he's talking about a lie. Whatever the alcoholic tells himself before he takes that first drink, it's a lie because we know what's going to happen. The justification for a spree was insanely insufficient. Let's underline that. Insanely insufficient. Insane. Belief in a lie. Insufficient in light of what always happened.
Doesn't say sometimes happen.
He says always happened. Please highlight the rest of this paragraph. There's a great point for discussion here, but let's go through it and then I'll mention it.
Do you think when it says, but even in this type of beginning, that they're referring to the beginning of our drinking careers, like well before we noticed that we were drinking justifiably?
No, I think he's definitely referring to once we know what's going to happen,
Right.
right? That we begin drinking and we know what's going to happen,
Right.
but we still do it.
So you mean before that we actually cross over into the insomnia and taking
Yes,
action?
before we
Okay.
cross over. Yep. Okay. Please highlight this.
What's the matter?
I just dropped something. I'm sorry. Always fooling around with things. Okay. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately, underline that, deliberately, instead of casually, underline casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Instead of terrific, you may want to write horrific, of what the horrific consequences may be. Now, let's go through what we just read. Let's break this down a little bit. When we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually, circle instead of. And I'm going to suggest you do something. Substitute instead of the words instead of, put in the words as well as. He's saying when we start drinking deliberately because of worry, depression, suspicion, whatever it is, versus some lie like it'll be okay if I put it in my milk or on a full stomach, or if I've had 25 years of sobriety, I can handle it again. Whatever that casual excuse is, when we do it deliberately, I need to calm down. As well as casually, again, casually is based on the lie. We have some lie we tell ourselves. There was little serious effective thought. Effective thought. If the thought was effective, we wouldn't take the drink. It is an ineffective thought that causes us to take the drink. So he's saying that whether we start deliberately, I'm suggesting, whether we start deliberately or casually, there was little serious effective thought of the consequences that might happen. Now, Bill is suggesting that if we do it deliberately instead of casually, there's little serious effective thought during the period of premeditation. I don't differentiate. I think whatever the reason is, whether I'm doing it because I think it's okay on a full stomach if I put it in milk, or I'm nervous as hell, I need to calm down. I know the consequences. So whether I start for this reason or that reason, the thinking process to get me to stop or to take that drink ends the same way. It ends in an ineffective conclusion, which is I take that drink.
So we can't think the drink through.
Can't think the drink through. There's the thought. If it were an effective thought, we wouldn't take the drink. It's an ineffective thought because we know what's going to happen. What is the thought? Bill tells us what the thought is. The terrific consequences that we might face. That's the thought. That thought is ineffective. It doesn't stop us from taking the drink. So whether we do it because we're angry or we do it because we haven't had a drink in 25 years, both reasons for starting are the result of ineffective thought of the consequences that may occur afterwards.
Insanity.
Insanity. Now, that's a great topic for discussion at some meetings. Rather than talking about the topic is surrender, let's talk about that. How about this as a topic? What do you think? Whether you start deliberately or casually, I think doesn't matter the reason why I start. They're both the result of an ineffective thought process of what the consequences would be.
No.
Self-knowledge is insufficient. We've been talking about a couple of inadequate, insufficient higher powers. I'm working on a handout for that, but we've come across a few of them already. We know that fellowship alone is insufficient because we are beyond human aid, and fellowship is human aid. We know that fear doesn't sober us up. Bill said fear sobered him for a bit. So fear might work for a while. It's an inadequate, insufficient higher power. It will not stop us all the time. Dr. Silkworth said frothy emotional appeals seldom suffice. That's an inadequate, insufficient higher power because it doesn't work all the time. And now we have self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, fear, human aid, frothy emotional appeals. Those are all inadequate, insufficient higher powers. They cannot keep me from the first drink, nor can a light bulb, incidentally, for those of you who think light bulb is a higher power. Can't stop you from taking a drink. Light bulbs break. Light bulbs wear out. What happens then? Okay. Speech over. Just as a point, think about that casually versus deliberate. Continuing. Now, in an effort to illustrate how ridiculous and absurd our behavior is with regards to the first drink, Bill gives us an example that is absurd and incomprehensible. He talks about a jaywalker.
I love this story.
I love the story
like,
too, but
as
I
a
didn't get it.
Yeah, but like as a kid, did you ever like hold your breath underwater to test yourself to get an adrenaline to see
Mhm.
if you would like, this is what we're talking about. Like,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
true. That's another one.
crazy. I
Yeah.
do.
So again, Bill illustrates the absurdity of our thinking by being absurd. So let's look closely at how the story of the jaywalker parallels the progression of alcoholism. Let's look for the parallels here. How jaywalking progresses versus how alcoholism progresses.
Oh, can I say something? I'm
Of
sorry.
course.
Does anyone ever think of this story if they do jaywalk sober? I always think of this story when I don't wait for the light to turn.
Yeah.
Seriously, maybe I'm just weird, but I
No, no,
always
no.
think I'm jaywalking. I'm a jaywalker.
When I'm at home in New York, that's the way you cross the street, is you jaywalk. Anytime in the middle of the street you want to cross, you cross.
Do you not
Who,
feel bad? I feel bad after reading it. So seriously, like I know it's
well, I don't feel bad, but I do think of this story.
yeah.
I do think of the jaywalker.
Phew, I know I'm not alone because everyone else, 142 people don't do it. I feel crazy, guys.
Nope.
Well, Howard does it, so
Yep, I do
two
as well.
sickies stick together.
Okay, so let's talk about the jaywalker. He says our behavior is as, please underline, absurd and incomprehensible. Let's define it. Absurd is defined in my 1934 dictionary as something that is senseless, lacking in reason or logic. That's what absurd is, something that's ridiculous, senseless, lacking in logic. Incomprehensible, we don't understand it. That's an easy one. Incomprehensible, not understandable. With respect to the first drink, and please underline that, respect to the first drink, are the way we are behave and think around the concept of the first drink is absurd and incomprehensible, even though our thinking is sound in every other aspect of our
Oh,
lives.
I beg to differ. But
Well, according to Bill on page 20 and 21 and 22, he's telling us that the alcoholic usually makes better decisions in other areas. I don't, that may not be the dead honest truth, but
how hard is it to get an alcoholic to tell the truth?
yeah, well, how do you get an alcoholic to tell the truth? Is you get him drunk and ask him, why did he do it? They say,
And
I
he
don't
said, don't
know.
know. Yay.
He's telling the truth.
Okay.
Okay.
I need to stop. Sorry.
Continue. With respect to the first drink, as that of an individual with a passion, please underline passion, and above it, let's put the word obsession. Let's call it what it is. He's got a passion for jaywalking. We have an obsession of the ease and comfort that comes from that first drink.
Just like when I hold my breath underwater and I test it and I see how many seconds I can hold. I have this passion because I have to beat it. Like jaywalker, he wants, to get
That's
a
it.
thrill out of it.
Yep. He gets that, that jaywalker, when he puts his foot off the curb onto the street, he's got a sense of ease and comfort. That's it.
So like
That's
he
the
doesn't feel fear, like
passion, obsession for jaywalking. He gets a thrill, underline thrill, please. Remember back in the doctor's opinion, he tells us that we are men and women who drink because we like the effect, the thrill. We like the effect. We like the thrill of the first drink. So he gets a thrill out of jumping in front of fast moving vehicles. What kind of whack job is this guy?
skipping.
Right?
We should give him a skipping rope.
That's right, skipping. He's not just walking, he's skipping. When was the last time you skipped anywhere? Skipping. Thank you for pointing that out. I've missed that line. Skipping. This guy's so stupid high. He's skipping, wow, 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 across the street. I haven't skipped since I was 3 years old. Okay, skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for for a few years, in spite of friendly warnings. Friendly warnings, frothy emotional appeals. I don't think that's a good idea. Why don't you go to the corner and wait for the light, right? Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Incidentally, one of the things I like to do, those of you who know me know I'm a buff on history. And whenever Bill uses examples in this book, I always try and, well, who was that? You already know that the man that our friend Jim was a guy named Harry Brick. We talked about Harry.
Harry Stone?
No, Harry Brick. I'm sorry, no, Ralph Furlong. Brick is later. We're getting to Brick. Ralph Furlong
His
is the
long.
real life character that Jim was based on. Ralph Furlong's story was in the first edition called Another Prodigal Story that was removed. You want to read those stories? They're in a book called Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is a compilation of all the stories that were ever removed from the book. So the sidetrack here, I'm not going to get too far off of this one. I like to know who we're talking about. So we found out that Jim was based on this guy. Well, what about the jaywalker? The Man of 30 we know was based on a story that was written that Bill read in The Common Sense of Drinking.
Being
Right.
Body.
He liberated it. He borrowed it. All right. But what about the jaywalker? Where did that come from?
Made up.
Well, I always thought it was made up, but it wasn't made up by Bill. I did some investigating and found that this story comes from Sam Shoemaker.
Wow.
That Sam Shoemaker, when he was trying to explain alcoholism to somebody who doesn't understand it, he used this as an illustration. And that's where Bill got it from Sam Shoemaker, who, in an effort to explain alcoholism to somebody who doesn't understand it, he told them this story.
Brilliant.
It's brilliant. That's just spot on. Sam Shoemaker. Thank you, Thank you, Shmail. Okay, Shmail. It's Yiddish for Sam. Okay, Shmoil. Up until this point, you label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured. Please underline several times in succession. And above succession, I've written progression. He's injured several times in succession, in progression, because his disease progresses too. Each time he gets hurt, he doesn't stop. He just comes right back and does it again. Our friend Jim was hospitalized 6 times in rapid succession. Okay, several times in succession. And let's highlight this whole sentence. You would expect him, if he were normal, and let's underline normal, to cut it out.
Cut it out.
Cut it out. We've defined alcoholism. One of the definitions we've used is because of this allergy that is defined as an abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. We have an abnormal reaction. Normal people, to use Bill's word here, normal people take a few drinks, a few lines, a few hits, whatever's going around, and you offer him some more, and at some point he's going to say, no, thank you. Either I'm going to get sick if I do any more, or I got to drive, so I got to take it easy. Well, they start saying some very strange things like, whew, I'm starting to feel it. I got to back down, or I'm right where I wanted to be. I don't need any more. Well, I've always drank and drug with the expectation of arriving where I want to be. It's always just another 4 or 5 drinks down the line. The promised land is always a few drinks away. So my reaction, my abnormal reaction, is to never be able to say no.
In other words, more.
More. More is my reaction. That is an abnormal reaction. The normal reaction is to say no, thank you at some point. So he was talking about the jaywalker here with, if he were normal, he'd cut it out. My God, if I could step out on that street one more time and wind up in the hospital, my God, this is nuts. I can't do this anymore. No, thank you to jaywalking. Please underline, presently he's hit again. Presently he's hit again. Sounds very much like our friend Jim, who knew he was an alcoholic. He knew exactly what was going to happen if he took that drink. He faced another trip to the asylum. He faced loss of his family, yet he got drunk again. Presently, he's hit again. Sound familiar?
Mhm.
It's the same story. The same old wine in a brand new bottle. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Let's underline has a fractured skull. In Jim's case, his fractured skull would be back to the asylum and loss of the family. Some serious consequence. In this case, it was a cracked skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. Let's underline breaks his arm. And I'm sure that that fast-moving trolley car did not jump off the tracks and run into this guy. It broke his arm because he ran out in front of it again. Trolley cars, if maybe you're too old to remember these, they still have them in San Francisco. They're basically like buses that Bert used to drive, buses that run on a rail in the street and take people from point A to point B. New York had them, they're gone. Most cities used to have trolleys. Like I said, San Francisco still has them. Actually, Boston still does too. But that's what a trolley is. It's like a bus or a train, but it's above ground and it's on a track. So a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm, right? Now, these things, these injuries would be pointless and academic if he never skipped out in front of fast-moving vehicles. So what's the problem? What's the problem with the jaywalker? What's his real problem?
He's bored.
Is it that he gets a thrill liking the effect from jumping out in front of these cars? And the sensation is so elusive that while he knows it's injurious, he cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false because it feels normal and it feels wonderful. He does it because he likes the effect. So, he breaks his arm. Let's highlight this next phrase. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. That's our national anthem. That's the Alcoholics' national anthem. I swear I'm stopping for good. I'll write it in the Bible. I'll swear on the kids' heads, whatever you want me to do. That's our national anthem.
It's his firm resolution not to drink in the cycle, too, right? Not
Firm
gonna
resolution.
drink.
Right. That's his firm resolution. And incidentally, underline, I think I said underline, decided to stop, and above decided to stop, I wrote self-determination, self-will. He's decided, he makes up his mind. So he's trying to stop on willpower, on brain power alone. What happens? Yet he got drunk again. At least that's the way we talked about it with Jim. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. Please underline that. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. Remember, we talked about passing through a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm determination not to do it again. In a doctor's opinion, we do it, we emerge remorseful with a firm determination. No, I'm swearing off. This is the last. I'm not doing it again. I'll write it in the Bible. Yet we get drunk again. Yet he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues. Please underline this conduct continues. If I go back to the doctor's opinion, there's a section, and I'll get the page for you if you care to do it, in the fourth edition. I'm going to go back to the doctor's opinion page XXIX. In the study version, XXVII. In any case, it's the page that begins with the phrase, the ease and comfort, the sense of ease and comfort, right? The sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking those few drinks. It's the next sentence I want to refer to. After he succumbed to the desire again, as many do, the phenomenon of jaywalking develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to jaywalk again. Does that sound familiar? But here's the line I'm going back to this for, because the thing we read about here is he says, on through the years, the conduct continues. In a doctor's opinion, he uses this phrase. This is repeated over and over. If you were with me at the time, we underlined that line and we explained it. What is repeated over and over? Periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety, followed by periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety. We drink until we can't take it anymore, till we can't stand it anymore, and we stop. And we stay stopped until we can't stay stopped anymore, till the pain and struggle, suffering of not drinking is greater than anything we remember when drinking, and we take that drink, and that is repeated over and over and over again. In the case of the jaywalker, he says this conduct continues over and over. Okay, let's go back to page 38. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful, right? I'll stop at 1, or I'll stop at 3, or I'll only have beer, or I promise I'm only going to smoke weed. I'm not going to take any dope. I'm not going to do any of that nonsense. Continual promises to be careful, to keep off the streets altogether. Again, this is repeated over and over and over. And until a psychic change takes place, nothing can change that. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce. He's held up to ridicule. Please highlight this sentence. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. Next to that, please write, it's in the mind, not the body. Our problem is not that we have an allergic reaction to the ingestion of alcohol. That's not our problem. Our problem is we have a mental obsession that tells us we don't have the allergy. That's the problem. The thinking in our mind. He's trying to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. Has anyone here ever made a decision to get alcohol out of your mind? Right? Okay. Doesn't work too well, does it? Well, it didn't work very well for him either. He shuts himself up in an asylum, in a treatment center. He goes into a treatment center. He goes into a detox and into treatment center, hoping to mend his ways, right? If we're beyond human aid, You have to know that nothing out here is going to mend your ways. No matter how many hospitals, no matter how many treatment centers you go to, they're not going to fix you. And that's what he thinks. He goes into the asylum thinking they'll fix me. Beyond human aid. He shuts himself up in asylum, hoping to mend his ways, but the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Has anyone ever gotten high on the way home from treatment? One time I got out of treatment, I didn't make it out of the parking lot. My car, which had been sitting there for 30 days, I knew had something under the driver's seat. And before I even started the car, I used it. I didn't make it out of the parking lot. So this guy, he races in front of a fire engine, breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You know, I've underlined crazy. Self-knowledge, self-determination, human aid is insufficient. The asylum didn't cure him. He's beyond human aid. You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? Please highlight the rest of the paragraph. We who have been through the ringer. You know what a ringer is? Back in the day before we had washing machines, you'd take your clothes out, or mom would take clothes out in the back in a big pail with a big washing board, and with a brush, clean apply soap to the clothes, and then put it in water and wring it, and then finally put it through a wringer, which were these two cylinders with a handle that you fed the clothes into, and it squeezed all of the water out of it. That's what a wringer is. So he said, we who have been through the wringer, imagine being put through the wringer, would admit, and please underline this, if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. Anyone here agree with that? Yeah, I bet there's 134 hands that are up or should be up. Okay, however intelligent we may have been in other respects, remember, an alcoholic is sometimes exercises common sense in other areas. Where alcohol has been involved, and above alcohol, you may want to write jaywalking, just to keep it relevant on this story. Where jaywalking is involved, where alcohol is involved, we have been strangely insane. Please underline strangely insane. And again, insane is making a decision based on a lie. It's strong language, but isn't it true?
Yeah.
We are not talking about what you drank or took, how much of it you took, how often you took. We're not talking about the consequences of your drinking or drugging. We're not talking about what type of bottom you hit either. We're talking about one thing and one thing only. Can we see the truth about alcohol? If we can, we're sane. If we can't, we're insane. So, why do I say that? Whether you have a quote high bottom or low bottom, if you get drunk, you get drunk the same way, by believing in a lie. It doesn't matter if you live on Park Avenue or Park Bench. If you're an alcoholic, you get drunk the same way, by believing in a lie. Doesn't matter what it is, where you are. what you've lost, can you distinguish between the truth and a lie?
We could call, got a vote. We could call this person Skippy.
Skippy is a good name.
I ain't taking credit for
Skippy
it.
the jaywalker.
My sister's taking credit for it.
Okay. Some of you are thinking, yeah, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of the symptoms, and please highlight, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellas did. Once again, high bottom, low bottom, get drunk, same way, believe in a lie. Nor are we likely to, for, and let's underline this, we understand ourselves so well. And above that, let's write self-knowledge. We understand ourselves so well that what you've told us, that such things cannot happen again. Please underline, such things cannot happen again. So if I underline the previous line, which says, we understand ourselves, and then we go to the next line, which is underlined, so such things cannot happen again. Self-knowledge. We've already established that's an inadequate, insufficient higher power. Okay. Please highlight this phrase, sincerely. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information.
No, don't say it.
Thank you for sharing. Kiss my ass. How many times have we said that to people? Huh? Thank you for telling me what you think of my life and what I should do and shouldn't do. Thank you for sharing that. But go take a flying.
I
You can
used to go to
complete that.
meetings when I first came to AA, the meetings, and I was like, God, that hasn't happened to me. And it's like, if I hear your war story enough, I'll learn from it. And it's not
Mhm.
an intellectual disease.
Right. It's not an intellectual disease. That's good. So basically, if you're comparing these things, well, I haven't gone as far as that guy yet. That's like saying I'm just a little pregnant. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a little pregnant. There's no such thing as a little dead. Either you are or you're not. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. Okay, so let's continue. This let's stop here. Because the next paragraph sets up Fred, and I don't want to start Fred at the end of the meeting. So let's stop it and go